Microsoft Planner is a fantastic tool for being able to manage our tasks at a team level. Throughout this series, we've seen how we can also automate a lot of the interactions that we have with Planner through the creation of tasks and by being able to add additional information. We're now going to look at the organisation of those tasks by automating the creation and management of buckets. Using buckets within Microsoft Planner is a great way of being able to make sure that our plans stay organised. Being able to separate our different cards into different columns to help to have that clarity about the different areas or maybe the different phases of a project. But also being able to apply additional filters and additional reporting based on which bucket those tasks appear in. So far throughout the series, we've looked at taking an email, and when it gets flagged, we create a task from it. We've then taken the attachments from that email and we've attached those into the Planner task as well, so that we've got all of the information that we need. So to finish off this journey, we're now going to take the date where we receive these emails, we're going to create a bucket for it, and then look at how we can manage our buckets going forward. So just as a reminder of what we've done so far, so we have when an email is flagged as our trigger, we grab the attachments from our email and we save those attachments in SharePoint. Saving them in SharePoint means that we can then take those files, we can create a link to them from the project card. So then when we're actually looking at the task, we can see the information about the task, we can see the title, we can see any labels that have been applied, but we can also then see any files that have been attached into there as well. So we're now going to finish off this journey by applying a scenario where I'm going to create or look for a bucket where the month and the year match when I've received the email. But we're not just going to create it, we're also going to be doing some checking to make sure that we're not trying to duplicate the bucket. If it already exists, we're going to use it. If it doesn't exist, we're going to create it. Or completely automate it. So let's go and have a look at what we need to do first of all. Well, the first thing that I need to do is I need to build the name of the bucket that I want to use. And for that, I'm going to use when the email was received. I'm going to take that date. I'm going to change the format of it because, I don't want the whole date time string. I could end up with lots of buckets. I just want the month and the year. So let's do that part first of all. So I'm going to, where should we do it? Let's come and do it down here. So let's go and add an action. It doesn't really matter where I do this part as long as it happens before I try and create my tasks. So I'm going to do it after I've got my attachments, but before I go and create my task. And so I'm going to use a compose action here. The reason why I'm using a compose is because I only need to set this once in my flow. I don't need to go and update it afterwards. So I'm going to create a compose, and this is going to be my bucket name. And for my bucket name, I'm going to use an expression, and I'm going to format the date and time. So for format date time, really useful expression. I can give it a date time string, and then I can tell it what parts of the date I want to use. So I'm going to keep my cursor there. I'm just going to switch to dynamic content. And let's just go and look for my received time. I can't see it at the moment, so let's just press see more. Let's scroll down. There it is. There's my received time. So let's press that in. So that's now put my dynamic content into my expression. Then I put a comma, and between single quotes, let's get rid of that tooltip so you can see, I now need to put the format that I want to use for my date. So like I said, I want the calendar month, and let's keep it nice and consistent. I want 3 letters of that month, and I want the full year. So in order to do this, I'm going to use uppercase M's. That is going to give me the short month, and 4 lowercase y's, which is going to give me the year. Okay, and let's press OK. Just hover over that. Okay, yep, all that looks good. So now that I've got my bucket name, I can then go and start to explore Planner again. So let's go and search for my planner connector. And in my planner connector, I have a number of actions which will allow me to interact with my buckets. So I've got my list buckets and I've got a create a bucket. So let's go and create a bucket first of all. And let's just see what this looks like. So I can give it a name. I have to tell it which group it belongs to and which plan it belongs to. And we've seen those two things before when we were creating a task. We supplied that information as well. So let's go and set those two first of all. So I'm going to select my Flowbytes group, my Flowbytes task plan, and the name of the bucket is free text. So now I can take the outputs from my compose action above, which was my bucket name, and I can paste that in there. So that action alone will create a new bucket and it will give me some dynamic content back. And part of that dynamic content is the ID of the bucket. And so I can actually then use that in my create a task below. So rather than having my bucket here as to do, I can then paste in some dynamic or push in some dynamic content. But before I do that, I want to check to make sure that the bucket doesn't exist first of all. Yeah, so we don't get duplicates or we don't incur errors because we've got a duplicate there. So we're going to look at the other action that we saw in Planner, which was list buckets. So I'm going to place this below my compose bucket name because we still want to use that name. So it has to go below my compose. Let's go and search for Planner again. Let's go and search for bucket. And this time I'm going to list buckets. Now the list buckets just gives me a list based on the group ID and the plan ID. So again, let's just go and fill that in. Flowbytes and Flowbytes tasks. And what this will give me is an array of buckets that have been found that relate to the plan that I've just selected. Now is a good opportunity, if you've not actually seen it before, to maybe pause this video and go and have a quick look at my Flowbytes videos on does it exist? Techniques that we can use to check if something already exists or not. In those videos we used SharePoint as a basis, but we can apply the exact same process here. If you've been and watched it and you're back, welcome back. If you're just carrying on, we're going to go through it anyway. So what I'm going to use is a filter array approach to check whether my bucket exists. So I'm going to add an action below my list buckets, and I'm going to use filter array. So this allows me to give it an array, and I can select the criteria that I'm looking for in that array. So what do I want to match on? So let's go ahead and fill this in to start off with. So what do I want to feed in? Well, it's going to be from my list bucket, it's going to be the array of values. So that's going to feed in. Then I select my choose a value. So what do I want to filter on? What do I want to match? Well, so far I've composed the actual name of the bucket. So you know what, let's go ahead and use that in my filter. So if I look at my dynamic content here, I've got my value name, which is the name of the bucket. So that is the display value. That's what we want in this case. So I'm going to select value name, where it's equal to, and how do I know what my name is? Well, I've stored it in the outputs of my compose. So my compose bucket name contains that name. So that's what we're going to try and look for in the filter array. And let's just keep this nice and tidy. Find bucket. Okay, so now that I've filtered for it, I have two potential outcomes. Is it found? Is it not found? And the way that we test that is by testing the length of the array that we get from the filter. If it's 0, it means that it doesn't exist, so we can go and create it. If it's greater than 0, we can use the ID that gets returned, and then we can feed that into our create task later. So let's go and put a condition in here. We've only got two potential outcomes, which is good. So a condition is exactly what we're looking for. And let's go and put in here that I want my, first of all, I want to test whether this is the length, test the length of what gets returned from the filter array. So I'm going to switch to my expression, I'm going to use the length expression. And in there, it's asking me to provide an array or a string collection, something where it can go and evaluate the length. So let's just switch back to dynamic content, and I'm going to use the body that comes back from my filter array. So filter array find bucket, yep, that's the one that I want. Body, in it goes, okay. So I can then decide, and it's entirely up to you which way you want to go. I always like to have my create on a positive leg. That's my own personal preference. So I'm going to say that if my length is equal to 0, therefore it doesn't exist in my list of buckets at the moment, then I'm going to create the bucket. If it doesn't exist, if it does exist, then I'm going to grab the ID and use that. But at the moment, we're not capturing the ID that comes back from my from either my create or from my filter array. So I'm just going to quickly rename this, because otherwise my little bit of OCD will kick in. So bucket exists. If yes, we'll create the bucket. So we have two potential routes where we can update some or create some dynamic content, but I only have one place that I want to use it down below. So because I want to update it this time, I want something that is updatable, I'm going to use a variable. So let's go and create a variable. So I need to initialize it again, first of all, just like what we did with our array previously. I'm just going to go back to the top, do it properly, Matt. So let's initialize the variable. And this is going to be my bucket ID. And it comes back as a type string. It's not quite a GUID, but it is a randomized string that is used to identify that particular bucket. So let's go and caps lock off, set my name. Okay, so now that I've got my bucket variable, let's go and first of all set it to a value over here. So set var, let's set the variable, let's set it to the bucket ID, and let's go and grab what I get from create a bucket. Let's have a look at what I've got. I've got the ID of the bucket, so I can use that. And let's just rename that. Okay, so I've done that on one side. I need to do exactly the same on the other side, but I need to grab the ID of what I'm getting from my find bucket, because at that point it will return a bucket ID. So let's go and use set var again. Let's go and grab my bucket ID. And so this time, I haven't got a create or a get to go and get the bucket information, but I can take the first entry that comes back from my filter array. Because we filtered it on that bucket name, we are working on the assumption that it's going to return one item. And so because I just want that one item, I could just put in the bucket ID, but it's going to loop. And that will set me off in terms of making my flow untidy. So I'm going to use the first expression. That will give me the first row that comes back in the array. What do I want the first of? Let's switch back to my dynamic content. I want the first entry in the body that comes back from my filter array. I can then give it a question mark. And in my, what do I actually want to get from that array? Because the array will bring back the bucket name, the bucket ID, the plan ID, lots of dynamic content. Well, if I just look over here for a moment, let's just open that back up again. I've got a uppercase I, lowercase d, and if I hover over it, then I can see exactly what it's looking to bring back. So let's actually just go and put that back in. So first, from the body, I want the ID. Okay, so I've gone for the ID because when I hovered over that, it does actually have body /ID, ID lowercase. So I'm just going to take whatever that uses and match that. So there we go. So let's press OK on that. So using this means that I'm not going to have an apply to each loop, but only having one iteration of it because it's only set once. So for me, it keeps it nice and tidy. So now that I've set my variable, let's come into my create task. And let's now replace my bucket ID. I don't want to do, I want to enter a custom value, and I'm going to use my bucket ID variable. And let's save that. So now let's go and have a look at what's going on. So let's go and put it into test mode. Let's test manually. And let's come across into my email. And you know what, let's go and flag my same email again. So let's go and see what happens. So this was received on the 3rd of August. And so if I flag this message, let's come across. So this will now start to do something. It's going to initialize my variables. It's handling the attachments like what it has previously. I've composed the bucket name, and there you can see that I've got August 2021. I can list my buckets, and what I've got in there is I've only got one bucket, and that's called to do. So that means that when I try and do my filter, it's going to not find anything. So I've got an empty array there. So having that empty array, just those two square brackets means that the length will be evaluated to 0. So when it comes into my condition, which was if the length is 0, it's going to go down the yes route, and so it's going to create a bucket. So it creates the bucket, sets the variable to my bucket ID, which is this value here, and then in the creator task, it then puts that into the bucket ID. So now when I come back to my planner, I have August 2021 as my bucket, and it's now put in there my actual task with the attachments like what we saw in the very first one. Just to show that it also handles the other side, let's just go and test it again. Let's go and have a look at this email that was that I've received as well, and let's go and flag that one. So that runs through. This time, because the bucket already exists, it's actually found something this time. So you can see here that even though it's still August 2021, it's actually evaluated that this time there is something there, it's found it. So it's going to go down my no route. And so I'm just grabbing the ID from my array and I'm using that instead of going to create a new bucket. And from there, it does exactly the same as before, creates the task and drops it into Planner for me. So you can see there's a lot of power by using Power Automate alongside your plans that you create within Microsoft Planner. Think about how much time that could save you if you introduce that into your processes, rather than you having to go and manage all of this yourself. Automate the creation of your tasks, automation the creation and the management of your buckets. 10 minutes a day saves you 7 days over a year. Think about that when you're thinking about your processes, and just consider how you can use Power Automate going forward. Well, I hope that small series of videos has been useful. If you do have questions about anything that I've covered, please do feel free to comment, or feel free to reach me at MattWeston365. You can find me on Twitter and also on LinkedIn. Anything I can do to help, I will gladly help you in any way that I can. But until next time, stay safe everywhere, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.